This is Pharaoh's house.
And I'm here with Osmodeus.
Yes, greetings. It's a wide range of topics that I had for Pharaoh today, but whatever you had on the itinerary that you wanted to express, I don't know. I know you wanted to do this today, so I'm sure you had something that you wanted to say that was of value already before anything that I guess any question I have for you.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay. I got questions too. So let's start with a question for you in regards to how do you classify yourself?
As far as my classification, it's taken me a long time to figure something to give a name to something that's uh, a true description, I guess, of how I could classify myself. Because I guess it would always boil down to the name. Like, because if I'm gonna say I'm a thing, I'm gonna say I would say I am, or like if I said my name is something, then I am Osmodeus. Or if I am somebody identifies with a color, they're gonna say I am this color or that color. But I never really had an opportunity to pick a side. I guess if people want to say that, like as far as dark and light goes. I feel like I mainly just assumed whatever people would classify me as, and I felt like I didn't necessarily have to express how I felt, like as far as classification goes, because I felt like I could never be. I didn't want to disrespect the the black, or what people call the black experience, or what black is, so-called black, and so to me, I never wanted to say that I'm black because I never wanted to just assume everything that came with that experience, because I know my experience is not the same as what they people might mean when they say that experience. So I never wanted to offend anyone and say that I'm black, but I never felt like I was white, and I also never felt like I could call myself mixed, just because of the way the, I guess the chips fell. So or the way the cards were dealt. So it's taken me all of the 31 years of my life so far to figure out something that, as far as giving myself a name, and I feel like Osmodeus is a better classification of something that is not misleading as far as to how I could classify myself, or what I am, or what my being is, because it's more it's a more accurate description than, say, a color, or um I guess I don't know any other classification that is not really like complete.
Now, I ask that when you respond or when you answer that you speak without metaphor and be concise as possible and also to the point, honest point, so that for those listening, there's no confusion and that what you say is appreciated but also received openly, honestly, and as it stands or as it is. There's no confusion on any part. But with regards to your answer, I did not really get it. But if you say that you're classifying yourself, this is what I got from your last sentences. You classify yourself as Osmodeus, as a name. But what do others see you as when they classify you?
I've been classified um, a bunch of different things at different times in my development, based on the way my body looked, like if, or my way my hair is. It depends on if I'm disheveled in my attire or not. All of that factors into who I'm with. All of that factors into what people
In
have
general.
classified me. Yeah, people. I mean, in general, I mean, it really depends on where I am. A lot of people are gonna say I'm white, but it really depends on where I am. If I'm in a place that has a lot of mixed people, or so-called mixed people, it's not necessarily assumed. It's kind of, because they know it's a difference. When I'm around other white people, they know there's a difference between me and them,
Mhm.
and so
Have you
it's
ever
more
asked
so.
a person who classifies themselves as so called white what they see you as?
Yeah, I've asked people before. I mean, I've asked people. Most people just assume, they say I'm white, or they assume that I'm white if You know, if they're from a certain place and they haven't experienced certain things, like
Mhm.
I feel like you have to see certain faces to see things in black and white like that. I mean, you have to not see certain faces like of the earth,
Now,
not be exposed to them.
what is color in terms of people to you? What is color?
Color, I guess you could say. I mean, for me personally, I would say there's only one color, and there's a lot of shades of the one color, or I guess, or darkness, or of light, vibrance, what have you. But I guess if I'm using it in like if I'm talking to someone that they're not communicating with themselves in the same way as me, I can talk to them about what color is or what people are. If I'm talking about black people, or if I'm saying black, I guess I'm typically referring to what people call like a sub-Saharan African. If you're saying black,
Now,
or if I'm saying black,
when you say sub-Saharan, sub means low or beneath, and Saharan, are you generalizing all people who have some form of melanin? Because the people in the Americas do not look like so-called sub-Saharan Africans.
yeah, no, I feel like I can see the differences between the different tribes of people. It it's just as far as like in society for communicating with people that have not, I guess, afforded themselves the perspective to see that there's differences, clear differences between the people that are of any shade. You know, there's dark people there's really dark people with straight hair, and there's really dark people with curly hair or kinky hair, and there's really pale people with straight hair and really pale people with curly or kinky hair. So it's I can see that, and see that there's a bunch of different archetypes and they can get diluted or albinized. But I know people might just lump it all as whiteness or lump it all as blackness or people of color. I don't know, like it gets sticky there as
Okay.
far as like dealing with perception.
And when you hear people of color, who are the people of color?
I guess anybody that would be not considered white on paper.
Okay. Now, is white a color?
No, no. If you ask me, it would be the absence of color. If you're asking me, but
So if I put red in a black room, can you see red?
no, no. If the room is all black, like there's no light in there, you're saying.
So wouldn't black be an absence of color as well?
I feel like it's just such a concentration of color that there's just no contrast.
Which means it's an absence of color if you can't see it through the senses, correct?
Yeah, I guess from the observable reality.
So there's
Yeah.
color people and non-color people. How can white be in a crayon box and along with black, but not be a color? Or paint in a paint can in a paint store and not be a color. Have you seen white walls before?
Yeah, I mean, if I guess it's different shades of white. So I guess like what is true white?
Are there people that are that color, like a crayon or a can of Sherman Williams paint?
I'm
For
sure
that
anything
matter.
is possible. I'm sure anything is possible, but I don't know if I've met anybody that pale.
Okay, or have you met anyone black? Like black, so black you could not see them if they stood in a dark room.
I've seen, I mean, yeah, I've seen people, incredibly dark like that, where it looks like their skin almost looks like an oil spill in the sun.
So they're the same color as their hair. You've actually seen a group of people that black.
I haven't seen a large amounts of people like that, but I've seen people very black like that at different places in the world.
Now, in general, or generally speaking, people who you classify or classify themselves as, or others classify as so-called black, are they actually black according to the color spectrum?
No, if we're going to dwell in reality based on what the colors are and in the reality of that, then no, a lot of people are. if you know, if they're going to classify themselves a color, we'd have to make, I don't know how many distinctions of brown and caramel browns and dark browns and blue blacks and green blacks and all of those different distinctions. That would be, I don't know, I don't even know how you would go about doing that.
So perhaps black and white are not based on color.
No,
Would that
no.
be accurate?
Oh, it's definitely as you would say, it's a status.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
therefore, one status is above another or raised above another?
Yeah, and the given in the reality that we're in, or in this environment that we're in right now, yeah, it definitely white has been considered like unscathed and just untampered with and pure. That's what white has been considered. And like we spoke about before, like early when I used to speak to you like years ago, you used to say every horror movie is actually racist because the dark is always associated with horror or fear or danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like, yeah, the association with white being pureness or the opposite of all of those other things like danger and stuff, then yeah, I think that in the society that we're in, for the most part, white has been put above in the mind, because heaven is considered white even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In
Okay.
a lot of people's mind. I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of people's mind, you know, they think of whiteness when they think of heaven.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any particular visible advantages for those who classify themselves as white or so-called white versus those who classify themselves as black or so-called black? Do you see any actual physical advantage? Not societal, not social, not abstract. I mean, do you actually, when you see people who are supposedly those two sides of the spectrum or two different colors, or as you said, shades, do you see any physical advantages in one over the other?
I guess that's like really dependent on your value system. From my observable reality, I feel like uh, that yeah that there's obvious advantages to having darker skin, but I guess if you're in a society where it pays to be numb, being pale might be an advantage in a sick environment. But besides that, in a true value system, I would say, you know, you definitely be able to you'd rather have the darkness to be able to process light
Mm-hmm.
and produce light.
Why do you think there is a disdain for what has been called darkness, but what actually is organic? Why do you think there is a disdain or a jealousy or an envy or anything negative towards that which is natural?
I guess it would just have to come with again like the status that comes with the fake environment. Like it's like being the tallest midget or being the smartest kid with Down syndrome almost. Like the things that come with the stat, like, because you're like it just comes with the phony environment. Like if you're in a more natural environment, then you'd want to have more natural everything. So like organic, like you were saying, more organic everything, you know, your body, your clothing, everything. You want to have everything more organic in that environment, but within a phony environment, I guess it would be a reverse value system because everything's inverted.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's all I had for now. Your turn.
Um, I wanted to ask you about as far as like we were talking about how people summon forces when they masturbate or when they have sex.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you what there if like any etiquette or rules as far as like even with tantra.
Mm-hmm.
I know, you know, it would still be something that has to be respected, and there's a bunch of things that are being missed, even if you are
Well,
just casually doing that.
those who claim to, just like with so-called race and status and color and all of that, those who are the most victimized are the most in the dark. So therefore, those who are victimizing themselves when it comes to so-called sexuality are truly in the dark and completely in the blind. I won't even say the dark. They're blinded, and we associate blind with dark, obviously. But if you think you are somehow defeating or tricking what you consider to be the hands of fate when it comes to masturbation by ejaculating, for example, you're only fooling yourself. You need to do some study on what is supposedly Tantra and realize that it had a purpose to give of energy, physical energy, to a so called deity, or what some people would term a goddess. And the practice of it was not just certain forms of ejaculation and recycling of energy. There were always outcomes to the use of Tantra. And the main reason and the main purpose was goddess worship. And the goddess always demands a sacrifice in the form of the male, something, the head of the male. And when we talk about the head in the sex sense, we're talking about the seed or the penis, that which comes from it. And by the way, disclaimer for those who might find this particular podisode too revealing or maybe sensitive, of a sensitive nature, then I say that you might want to refresh yourself and get some more knowledge about the topics before going into it. I'm not talking from a prurient standpoint. I'm talking about it from a knowledge standpoint. We're adults here, and if you're not an adult and you're listening, you're going to have to learn about certain things anyway, if you so choose. So I'm not talking about it from that sense. This is not like a television show where, the disclaimers they give about.
This is not opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So when I give the disclaimer like this, I'm talking about refresh your knowledge or get the knowledge before you listen. You can go back and listen to this again or move forward and listen to this again. But if you feel that it's too sensitive or it's kindling emotions, then get some more information, get some more knowledge first. Great. If it's going to take time, then so be it. This should be online for a while. So proceeding on or moving onward, you're only fooling yourself if you think that you've mastered the art of Tantra. I'm talking about males, because regardless of whether you spill seed or whether you reserve it, you are calling forth forces. I mean, look at it from a tertiary sense. When you're dealing with any kind of bodily action, biochemical action, you call forth a lot of different things automatically. Just by talking, we call forth things. When they're talking about this so-called pandemic, you call forth and it's an ebb and a flow. You send and you receive, supposedly. And they use the term aerosols, the moisture that exudes from us. That's because we are heat-born creatures. We are combustible within. We're like little fusion plants of nuclear energy. But what comes forth from the mouth, what comes forth from the top of the crown, what comes forth from the hands and the soles of the feet, and depending on who you are, from more than those areas, you release a heat index, you release energy. Therefore, if you're focusing energy or it's concentrated in a particular area, now mind you, let's look at the so-called orgasmic rush or the orgasmic energy. That is not just coming through the genitalia and the nerve endings of the genitalia. That's the end point. It's coming throughout the entire body. You may have become numb to it, like many people have, primarily male, so that it's focused in one area. So if it's focused in one area, that's where the blood is rushing. But not only the blood, that force field. And that is going to attract things that require that energy or eat that energy. No different than if you spill blood in the ocean and wonder why are certain things coming to you. It might not even be a puddle of blood. It could be a dot of blood. And you wonder how a hammerhead shark 10 miles away can sense it. smell it, taste it, whatever it uses to co-locate or bilocate and locate the source of that blood energy. No difference than with so-called release of sexual energy. You're getting into cycles that you have no clue about because you're in a world where dumbness is living. And this is no place to be dumb.
So what is happening when people are summoning these things? Like as far as when you're going to sleep at night and you're going into your dream state, if you've been eating inflammatory foods and then you've been releasing all the sexual energy, and then what does that do for your dreams? Because I remember you were saying, as far people that aren't in communication with their dreams, it's like being in a coma within a coma. I just want to know, like, what does that do to people when their blood is all in that area, in the reproductive area and in the digestive area, as they're sleeping?
Imagine a world around you of, of various creatures. I'll just say creatures, of various types of creatures. And you have no clue about their origins nor their purpose. They know what you are, and like any predatory animal or creature, it knows what it eats, it knows what it likes. And often you see the kindergarten version on the Discovery channels or these cable shows, or in your schools. You see the very juvenile forms of education about the so-called animal world or animal kingdom. You don't realize that predators and prey have an interconnection, an energetic interconnection. The predator will attract its prey. You think about, oh, only spiders do it, or only certain fish or certain small creatures do it. No, every predatory animal does it. I mean, people do it when they're fishing. They use a lure, they use bait. When someone's in a nightclub, they'll use bait, perfume, makeup, whatever, exposed flesh. You're using bait. So that's not something that is alien, but if you don't realize and recognize it, then again, you're being in the dumb. You're staying in the blind and loving it. These
So if you
creatures,
have a
these
sorry.
creatures know these creatures know what their prey is, and so they will use bait. And the bait is partly from the person, and that could be in the form of, if you've eaten a high amount of calories that will produce peroxide and alcohol within you. That's the perfect illusion chemical material. It's the perfect illusion material. You're going to have a lot of visuals. So the visuals are coming from you. The creatures will just use that to transform those visuals into whatever's in you. They don't have to create anything. Those are already in you. They're in your neuronal network. They will just call them forth, and you'll see whatever, your favorite celebrity in the buff or something else that will inspire or bring about a reaction, an excited reaction while you're asleep.
So
And
that's masturbating.
yes,
That's masturbating.
you got it, bait with an I.
So as far as like what can people do to protect themselves as far as sex? Or like how often should they be doing it in their lifetime anyway?
You should be masturbating. That's fun. You've been taught lies. Oh yeah,
Oh,
you
that's
need to
for
do
sure. No, definitely. None of that. And none of that for sure. But like as far as like sex to like with like tantric sex with your partner that that you're with, like how many times in a lifetime should that even be done?
Well, first you have to ask yourself, why are you doing what you're doing with this person you call a partner? You'll come up with an example that says what, or you come up with an answer that says what. Says that you're repeating what someone else told you. So, for example, if I ask you, why do you indulge in so-called tantric sex with a partner or partners? Why do you do it, and why does she do it? What's your response?
For me, at this point, it's kind of like a self-defense mechanism just to not release and to kind of like bypass that whole process of getting caught up in releasing and being with people because it feels like like it's, I don't know, with the climate of things, if I'm gonna attract people, so it's not like sex is almost inevitable. So I feel like this is the only way that I can like use it as like a self-defense mechanism, kind of, instead of something that where I would be just totally giving up the goods if I was releasing.
But your words, not mine. You said as a defense mechanism. Why is it a defense? Why are you using defense mechanisms in your union with another person? I'm avoiding certain words, like relationship and all that stuff. I don't want people to get dragged into a parasitic realm. So that's the only time you're going to hear me say that.
Yeah,
Why,
no.
why would you say that? Why is it a defense mechanism? And why do you feel pushed or urged, these are your words, that you have to indulge in a sexual act? Is it because you're trying to appease someone or something? Or, you want to hush them up because they're going to be begging you after a point? Or are you doing it to maintain the bond, or whatever you want to call it, the union? Otherwise, they'll leave you. Is that why you're doing it?
No,
Or
like in my history of doing it in my lifetime, it's been one of the only things that I could trade as like a currency for me. Like it's I mean, prostitution in a sense. So it's been like a self defense. Like that's kind of like since I haven't learned ways to trade other things, I haven't enhanced myself to trade other things. So that has been my currency when I'm in a bad way as far as other currencies.
why would you subject yourself to that, knowing that each time you do it, you are hurting, literally, your soul status and subjecting yourself to infestation by a lot of different forces?
I mean, at this point, it really is kind of like any other addiction where I'm at that uh, a different point in the cycle where I can't continue. I know enough now to where I can't continue to behave the ways I've been behaving,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more so just getting. I'm in another space where I just I'm getting back to the mountain, and I'm gonna have to, instead of rinsing and repeating, do move forward with the experience into something that isn't redundant,
Mm-hmm.
something something that's different,
Now,
and that's
pardon,
sorry.
continue.
No, that's what I feel like. That's what's great about these podisodes, so I can make myself available and bring clarity in my life for this purpose, as opposed to cleaning my energy and keeping my energy clean and having clarity and sensitivity in my body just to use it sexually. So I feel like, yeah, I'm definitely at that point now. Based on our conversations too. I think another reason, I like the loneliness that I had. Gotten the reason I got involved with people was out of loneliness, because I hadn't spoken to you and had some clarity on certain things, because I was involved mentally in things that didn't they weren't a part of my purpose or my path. So I was creating lack that just had nothing to do with what I was doing. It was like, as far as like um having a child or having a family, it's like I can't even think about those things anyway. I shouldn't even be thinking about having sex with a person, because those things aren't on the agenda before the conversations like these podosodes and other things that I have to complete before I could even think about something like that. If I should ever even think about that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with thinking about something. That's the start to learning or knowing or understanding, understanding, whatever kind of standing you want to get from it. But that's the start. It's okay to think, but as long as your thinking is logical and intelligent, that's the main thing. So returning to a previous question that I asked, which is, when do you realize or ask yourself, what are you doing? Because if you're indulging in what is called sex, or it doesn't matter anything, when you're indulging in something and you truly don't know what it is for, or you think you know what it is for, when do you stop and say, or as you just said, when do you stop and think, maybe I need to do a lot of homework to find out what this whole act is about. What's the purpose? And then, once you've done that at least, ask yourself, am I going to be mature enough to accept the answers that I get, that I receive, that I find?
Yeah, like if I'm not taking, if I haven't versed myself in midwifery and many other things that come with that, it the whole order, it makes no sense. So, like you said, you have to do your searching and your contemplating.
Okay, let's look at it and be clear. From you're a man, I'm talking to a man, you're talking to a man. Let's say we can only focus on that. We can focus on women too, but we'll focus on what men do and who men are, the masculine energy. So, do you ask yourself, what is this act that I'm doing? Have you actually thought about it? Did you actually think for a second or wonder or ponder? Clearly ponder, honestly ponder. Is there more to this than what the mechanics say or show? And when I say mechanics, folks, I'm not talking about auto mechanics. I'm talking about the actual mechanics of the so-called sex act. It's easy to get caught up in that and only in that. So that's the question. Have you gone beyond the mechanics of it? And I'm not talking tantra or anything like that. But that's fine too. That's a step.
No,
But have you actually gone beyond and said, is there something that's missing? And maybe I'm misusing an act, a sacred act.
yes, yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I've definitely, that's definitely, and that's why, like you said, and when you know what's correct and what's not, and still don't do it or do the incorrect thing, then it's like a double violation. And that's kind of like my life has just been a lot of double and triple violations. So I suffered as a result.
Have you talked to, because it takes two, have you talked to the women in your life? And what was the result when you talked to them about your self-exploration and revelations? Have you asked them questions and what was their
Um, I,
responses?
have I asked them questions like, I don't know. I guess no, I haven't asked questions because I assume everything, and I assume so much. I assume that I'll never be able to communicate certain things, so I should just stop wasting my time and just get back to myself and stop wasting their time.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, next thing, this is something that I notice with a lot of people in your cohort or what they call age range or group or social group, that your language is innocuous. It's not taken seriously. Or if it is, it might be parasitic, where the person knows what they're doing. They're just shocked when someone catches on, but they know that typically the people of their own grouping don't have a clue and they misuse it. I've noticed that. And for example, some of the people who have consulted with me or contacted me, they'll say things like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's very interesting. Or I'm curious. They have no clue that I know what those words mean, but yet they use them readily. And then, of course, you have a lot of folks in that age group, and I guess older too, where they're not literally about to make any progress because that's not what they're there for. Have you encountered a lot of that, and why do you think there are so many minds like that in your experience?
I think it's because like right now, disrespect is like the new respect, or like in the inverted bizarro world, people are like so disrespectful, and then I feel like their body, the energy is so broken, the energy doesn't flow through their body enough for them to even, like, when you tell them they're being disrespectful, and then they realize what they have to do to be respectful to themselves and to life. They realize that it's going to require energy that they've allocated to something else, and that something else isn't growing them. So there's like, it's just, their energy just isn't there for respect. It's for disrespect. It's not. It's allocated to disrespect. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's the standard. So people, when you're being respectful, they take it as disrespect because everything's inverted. Like, talking to people directly and being respectful to bring that out of them. And everything's inverted, so I feel like they know that they have to be respectful, and they have a lot of work to do to be respectful, to truly be respectful. So I feel like that's why the people that are in my bracket, they're heavily distracted and chemically lobotomized in a lot of ways, but it's never really an excuse for being disrespectful. But that's what I would say. That'd be my summary of why my age group, people from from 40 under. I'll be
Mhm.
honest. People from 40 under, I would say. People over 40, they might have more respect in their words, more care in their words, but under 40, it's not as much respect the further you go down in
Mhm.
age.
Probably because those older than them didn't impart that on them. So those older than them dropped the ball, as they say, and did not impart it, or were just too lax about it. I notice a lot. For example, I hear people who write me or call me, and they'll say, "Hey, Pharaoh," and I don't even educate anymore. I just don't even respond. Hay is for horses, folks. And if you study the meaning of hay, it's not something you want to say to anyone. It's like a term you would use for your closest, very informal buddies or friends or pals. You don't go using that with strangers, and get the word to the wise, basically. But in any case, yeah, I hear what you're saying about disrespect being the new respect.
Yeah, it's like if the more ignorant you can be, then people like that's like the rating system almost right now. But people really need to respect you, Pharaoh, when they call you, man. Anybody that is that wants to consult with Pharaoh, they need to have their notes ready, and you need to greet him properly, man. Like this is somebody that I'm just glad that he'll speak to me. So you guys that are just developing a new relationship with him, you guys, I'm just saying that you should be respectful. You should be respectful. Is all I'm saying.
Most people who contact me are respectful, but I can sense in them that, especially in the words they say, it's instant. And when you say things like, "Oh, that's interesting," they don't realize what that means. Uh, People who have an interest in something are not ready for progress. It's not that they're ready; they're not about to take the steps that are going to get them into the moving onward or moving ahead mode of the life or of this life. So when they say they're interested or they're curious, that's like having a love of pizza. That's an interest. So if you are going to make progress, you literally are going to make progress. You don't have to say it. You literally listen and you do it because you know that there's more than meets the eye to this place, and you're not here to play games anymore.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, everything you do is important.
Yet,
Everything everybody does is important.
exactly. That's why I started off this episode talking about such things as status, which people don't even look at. They gloss it over and they accept things and they wonder why are things happening. Well, things are happening because of that fact. Ignoring the blood, ignoring the gaping wounds, ignoring that. So, regardless if we're talking so-called race and the status that's associated with it, or if we're talking about so-called sexuality and the abuse of self and one another, you cannot continue acting as if these things are not real and going along with the motions. You can, remember what I said before, you can do whatever you want. Everyone's doing whatever they want. You can. That's the way of this place. So I've had, in the course of 24 hours, I've had so many questions posed to me. But if you want to know what the primary focus was in most of the questions, fear of what's happening in Europe.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure that was that was a hot topic because people don't know who to talk to. And as far as anybody that has knowledge, like we used to talk before, you were like, do you want to talk to somebody that has an opinion about something, or do you want to talk to somebody that actually knows? And we know that you know. So
And,
I like it. Yeah,
and
yeah.
they can too. Right now, this what is the motto that I put out there? Time to know is now. I didn't put that out there just flippantly. There's a purpose for that. This is the actual time to know. This is the time to know. There are times to know, and this is the time. This is one of them.
What is the actual time, Pharaoh? If you don't mind telling us what year it really is, to let people know what time it is really.
There's 4 different types of year systems, and as you know, if we're looking at it according to particular groups, those are all based on their time frame for their agendas. These literally time agendas. The one you're in now, in the so-called thousands, you have to subtract the 1,000 off of it. So if this is supposedly 2022, you take off 1,000 years.
Or 1022. I'm sorry.
1,022. Yeah, 1,022.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 1022. Yeah. So I remember, like, you were saying, like, as far as the sex thing, what's really happening. You didn't want to talk about just the mechanics, and we were talking about the forces that get summoned. Like, there's a metaphysical grid, or like you were talking about ley lines or law lines.
Lay is the law. Go ahead. Pardon. I just want to
I
say
was
that.
gonna I was gonna ask the question a little better. I was gonna say, I know that there's a metaphysical grid or an unseen grid that's happening, and then that's like an actual, like, the organic God grid, and then you were saying that there's gonna be another God grid. I guess there's already one kind of now, and then there's gonna be another one laid down on top of that.
Yeah, that's been done quite often in empires, in empiric history. We use the word empiric and empirical and don't even realize what it traces its roots to. We are in an empire, and we've had many of them. They have to exist for parasites to be here. And this is an empire. One of the facets of an empire is a grid, and the grid is constantly being adjusted and overlaid. We have now a new grid overlaying, but it's nothing new in the sense of innovative. It's been done before. All of these grids are recidivist. They're just the same thing over and over again. It's only the clueless who have no idea that these are nothing new.
So what kind of grid are we in now, and how much worse will it be, or how much more intense will it be? I guess in the next 2 to 3 years, if you have any type of timeline or anything like that, people, so they can understand the sense of urgency as far as speaking of you and self and learning and unlearning, so that they really realize, that they need to have a sense of urgency
Well,
for, if
some
they care.
a sense of urgency started from the day you arrived, everyone. And, this is not a place to play. You can play here. Remember that? You can play, but there will be consequences. So this is not a place to play. And anything that is a physical manifestation, such as education systems or school, any of the things that so-called societies allegedly create, but they didn't. Those are all manifestations or copies of something before us. And I'm not talking about our ancestral past. I'm talking about this actual place. It comes with order. One of the order is learning or absorbing. And there's ways to do it. And there are ways to do it incorrectly or improperly. In the orders fashion, there is a progression. You're supposed to progress, and there's not been any progression. And when not, it automatically calls in a destruction sequence. You can call in destruction sequences in many ways. That's one of them. When there's no progress, it's like stagnation. Stagnation in a riverbed or a creek leads to a series of circumstances that will naturally occur.
So you're definitely gonna get parasitic environment in a stagnant environment. So I remember you were saying that the question of souls has ceased, and that the creatures being birthed now, or whatever, for lack of a better term, aren't they're beings, but they're not human soul, or they're not souls.
Just spirits. Just spirits.
And a spirit is like a dog, or like a anything that's like a spirit that's bound to this particular experience. It doesn't move past this experience. It's like part of the fabric of it.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too far off on a tangent, but to keep in line with that, with what you're saying, imagine, or have you heard when the topic is is about cloning, and then they tell you the person talking about it brings up the moral issue of cloning. Um, what do we do with the clone? Does the clone have rights, especially if the clone is just being used for body parts? It's not a full person. And the person who it's cloned from, they have a right to that because it is them. So if they want that heart, or if they want that kidney, or if they want whatever, they have a right to get it. That's kind of the same thing when you're talking about spirit forms that are being birthed now. You're you're just birthing spirits randomly and rampantly.
It's just a blood and tissue banking, I guess.
Why would you do that? Why would you put someone through that?
And then I guess when you create beings like that, they have kind of no choice because their sphere of consciousness is like designed to be like a pit bull in the artificial grid.
That, and you've also increased the level of work that you and others have to do in a so-called society. And that's just how it has to be. If you don't, you get the addiction, you get the vehemence, or the violent behavior, or psychopathic behavior. You have these particular types of life forms have to be guided closely, not to compare, but it's in a sense of you cannot leave a special needs child vulnerable in a society. They will either hurt themselves, or someone's going to hurt them or take advantage. So this is a special needs soul or special needs spirit, basically.
It's like almost like how sugar is an isolated thing and doesn't have the fiber and all the other stuff with it. So it's like an isolated. There's no a person that's the spirit or like that. That's like a cultivar person or a fiat person kind of. They they don't have all of those parts to them, so they need more support around them. That's basically what the people are that are keeping them alive. I guess if it is, it's life support. Yeah.
And their nature is to drain.
So what would be a good core value for like if we're getting the 27,000 people listening to this or that have access to this channel or they're subscribed to it rather to get the 10,000 people like we were speaking about on the last podisode to get 10,000 people to make a change and to really cleanse themselves for the sake of the world for the sake of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the core principle, I guess, like what it to bring these people together? I know you could say it a better way than I can, so I'm just asking.
No, that was good. The core principle would be to have a code that transcends the the typical codes that are used today. That it's okay to recognize the past and acknowledge it, and recognize one's bloodline commitment, not commitment, but contribution to it, and realize that kind of like an addiction promise. When someone is in an anti-addiction program, you have to make certain types of promises, and I think the way they do it in, what is it, AA, you have to make amends for the things of your ancestral past, and then you move forward, not committing those same atrocities or same abuses to those who were hurt and to yourself. So that would be the code right there. And this is a lifelong thing. And then you realize you have to separate from that which is all around you. You have to. Uh, you separate organic from conventional in order to supposedly have best nutrition.
Yeah, I mean you did definitely. I mean you don't put the ripe fruits next to the rotted fruit.
No, nor anything that's going to taint it in the building block sense, so-called genetic sense.
So in the next 2 to 3 years, what do people's focus need? Does it need to be just cleansing so that they can have a better connection with their dreams, and then it'll intuit their instructions will be intuited to them from themselves,
True
or is there
community,
something?
true community, where you have to cleanse self. You have to repair yourself, but at the same time support others who are also repairing and cleansing, and then be wise enough to realize, okay, not everyone has to do what you're doing, and realize that those who are not doing what you're doing, okay, separate, separate.
Because it would just be counterproductive anyway. You just be spinning your wheels. Because like I remember you were saying like years ago we had spoken, and I was talking about, I was like, I just wanted to install this in someone, this knowledge, and you were like, you can't install anything in anybody.
No, and
You
you
can't teach
no.
consciousness.
Exactly. In a community, the community serves the community, and you approach the community not as a parasite, not trying to drain it. You approach it with what can I do for everyone, and you're part of that everyone. So you get help, and everyone else gets help. You see that there are no communities really. What you see is a bunch of parasites, and parasites operate in colonies or communities, and they get what they have to get done, which is service to parasite. That's what they do. They're supposed to do that.
So for the wealthy or the parasites at this point, they're experiencing a more true sense of communism. Because the actual, because in a sense, like we're all kind of living in a dysfunctional communistic state. And I always wanted to talk to you about it because like I always wanted, like, as far as like a free market, like is it, should you not call it a free market?
Well,
Like something that doesn't have, huh?
market is a sign of a war. You know, all these terms, these isms, communism, capitalism, these are all part of the same uh, paradigm, and they are perversions of community. They are perversions of autonomy. They're not the real thing. They're distractions. And so people who get caught up in what they figure is what they call socialism or communism, those are all distractions, and they will lead to the same destructive endpoint. You don't want to participate in any of those things. And a free market, that's that's a clear sign that you are at war. An empire is a war system. Everything is based on war, and I'm not the first to say this, as you know. Everything is based on war. The packaging of your foods, your clothing, the behavior systems that are accepted, those are all war system. Your health, so-called healthcare system, is a war system. The race and status system, or racism system and status system, is a war system. You have to have a permanent enemy, and the permanent enemy has to have a particular, designated phenotype. That's part of an empire. That's part of a system. And a free market is part of that same structure, same system. When you hear the word market, when you hear the word commerce, that's part of war. These are war terms. That means that you are not only against war against the so-called sentient being, and primarily the aboriginal or the original, main focus, the man, the original man. That's the main focus. It's the main focus of racism. It's the main focus of feminism. It's the main focus of all the isms that, you have to, because everything takes two. So you focus on the man, and then therefore you break apart that part, the section or faction of the so-called society. You always keep them under control. They're your compost. Everything looks at that and says, I don't want to be that. But they're also your energy source. They're your fuel source. You have to keep a certain number around, which is what's done. Well, when you talk about free market or commerce, you are at war. The first thing you're at war is with nature. You've put a price on nature. You're selling it. It's under captivity. You call it supply demand or economy. And now someone has control over it. That's kidnapping. That is hostage. That's what happens in wars. People are held hostage. They're prisoners of war. Your so-called food supply is basically, you can call it prisoners of war when you go to the grocery store. You're not buying food. You're buying prisoners of war. It's held hostage. It has a label on it. It has a price on it. Yeah.
It's behind a barcode, behind bars.
Yeah, it's behind. That's perfect. I couldn't have said that better. Yes, it's behind bars.
So if you're in a community, an organic community, or one that is complementary to the collective,
Hmm.
how do you engage in trade and not be offensive? Like,
Well,
because
there's no.
I just always want to know, like, do you not keep score, or do you keep score just out of like friendly competition? Okay, so in um in a true organic community, how do you trade? How do you trade organically without residue and without keeping score and making so that like what kind of what bound? Is there any boundary to that? Like what is like especially when things get big? Like if you created a large community,
Hmm.
like what are the rules? Like, is there any written rules, or is there like a cap where you're saying like no, communities don't get bigger than this?
Yeah, you don't want communities growing bigger than a certain amount. No different than if you're in a forest. The forest can only withstand the certain amount of life forms in it, and then others are spread out in other areas. That's just the way it goes. You're not destroying or delimiting anything, but you know what can be sustained. I don't like that word, but there it is, sustained in one particular spot. The other thing, as far as trade is more of a knowledge thing when you're talking trade. Therefore, we have to wean ourselves slowly off of what we've been trained to do and believe and think or interact. Trading of knowledge, meaning you have to have knowledge that can be traded, and everyone should be wise, must be wise. We've been allowed to become mediocre and accept it. Everyone has
So
to have a level of wisdom that is constantly being challenged, but at the same time expanding for the benefit of community.
so yeah, everybody has. There's no waste. There's
There's,
like you said. There's no residual.
right.
There's no residual. Yeah.
Yes, because residual has to be used. It's an energy. It has to be used. And I was about to give an analogy to a baker and the little leftover pieces of dough. They don't throw them away. Some people probably do, but they don't throw them away. They use them to make something else. So the residual is left over, is constantly being used, is constantly being reformatted. There's always residue when you're creative. That also ties into the whole sexuality thing too. There's residue that's left over from the so-called creative cycle, and every time a man or a woman, indulge in these energy cycles, they are releasing residue. There's an intent, there's a purpose and a focus, but you can bypass that, which most people do in the sex act. And the residue that's left over, what is that going to become? You're making a whole lot of spirit energy.
Because it's like alchemy. It's almost like it's the same thing like with eating food. Like you not only take the chemicals of the food in, you take what chemicals get created
Yes,
from the
and then you release them in a way that is conducive for the land you stand on, the water you drink, the air you breathe, and your so-called self. You're communicating that back, and what's being communicated back is poison.
no, yeah, and so that's the same thing that you were saying with sex though. Like if you're it's like alchemy. It's just like bringing these ingredients together, these spirits, these energies together, and you're creating a spirit like that because the blending, right?
Yeah, you're creating a tulpa, as some people once called it.
And so it's like an actual entity at that point could that wants a body to use for whatever reason
It's a parasite
every single time too.
all the time. It's no different than decomposition. This is what happens this is what happens when certain things don't exist within a life form. Decomposers come in and break things down. It has nothing to do with like or love or hate. That's their job.
So like in a quantum sense, I always wondered this too. Like as far as you have a society of males that are just constantly releasing seed, and like, and I know you were saying like the parasite network.
It's what you hear in the summer when you listen to the forest. You hear the constant creation process, mating and dying and mating and dying. And that's what these supposed sentient beings have allowed themselves to become. Nothing more than a bunch of cicadas.
In a sense, when your consciousness gets reduced to something so seasonal like that, then you're just gonna move like the anima. You're never gonna ever see beyond the cycles.
And you get eaten. Do you think twice about insect life or the ones that are being eaten right in front of you? Do you try to save every little butterfly that gets caught in a web? No, you know that's part of the process.
So like every
So
time somebody ejaculates, they're creating something though. Are they summoning an entire like being in a quantum sense? Like they're creating a whole nother person that they're
no, it's,
gonna
it's
meet now?
so when you do an act like a masturbatory act, there is a function. You stick your finger in your throat. That's a gag reflex. It's just the way it's built. You pay for the consequences based on what it is, not some
Not your
altruistic.
opinion.
Right, not an opinion.
Because like I mean those taxes that are unseen are basically or the taxes that are just understood and they're not even considered taxes. Like people that are releasing seed, like that's extremely taxing. It's like that kind of brings me back to the market thing as far as like taxation goes. Like all the trade has a taxation on it,
Right.
and I guess
That's
the parasite doesn't want you to know it's a tax
right. That's
because if
the
you knew it was a tax,
take that. Let's change that. If you knew it was a tax, you'd still do the same exact thing.
oh, yeah, for
Most,
most part, a lot of people, yeah.
yeah, most folks know exactly that there's something not right about the whole setup, but yet they just indulge.
Would you call it possession, or would you just say like the parasite's just pretty much just like putting the noose around your neck and you're just kicking away the chair, or is it just total possession?
What is possession other than parasitic infestation?
Yeah.
If you read about certain types of parasites that infect the eyes and the brain, they will tell you that these types of parasites that induce dopamine and a sense of euphoria will actually eat the brain and make you feel good while you're being eaten, and then have you doing certain things that help them stay around, like what you eat or the electronics that you encourage by absorbing. And that's one thing that's a real big food source, or it's actually a facilitator. The electronics, electricity is a big, big, big or major source for parasites. It actually helps the things that are not supposed to be food, become more tasty.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have you have a mass of people on a grid that electricity gets eaten up by concrete. So it's like it forces everybody to vamp each other because there's like no ambient energy the environment's not communicating back. You're not communicating and breathing back, and none of that's happening. So it's being on the grid and it's like a bunch of ringing, right? Like I always felt like it's kind of like a dog whistle having the Wi-Fi.
Well, not only Wi-Fi, but most RF frequency automatically. Yeah, it's a constant, nonstop whinny or high-pitched whinny ringing that is the mode or the pulse. It's the false pulse. This realm has a pulse. That it's a rhythm, and overlaid on top of it are a bunch of different pulses. And the typical towers have pulses, have pulsating
So
vectors.
from my observation, like you said, we're on an artificial it's an artificial rhythm being projected now. From my observation here is like the breath is the spirit, and if they can mess with people's breathing algorithm or pulse or whatever, they can mess with their pulse or pattern of their body,
Mhm.
and so that seems like to be the whole attack is to just to interfere with the flow of the spirit, so that the consciousness can never really be in alignment with the body.
Hmm. Well, you have to know what a spirit is versus the actual ambient soul. Spirits are programs, and anyone can make them. You can make them. Your phone can make them. It doesn't take much to make a spirit, and an app is a spirit. What it is imbued with is whatever its maker or its source is imbued with. So you can call it like a doppelganger, so to a degree. Spirits are residual, and those are the things that people encounter when they say there's ghosts, and they have a level of intellect. Depending on the right circumstances, they can and they do interact. They have a level of so-called volition, but it's no more than a so-called android or robot, and it's based here.
You can only communicate with it based on its coding.
And it cannot go any further than here. Kind of like a character in a video game, but you'll constantly connect with spirit forms. Not necessarily someone who's so-called transition, but spirits are in many forms.
But
Spirit
I mean, like as far as
chemistry.
the connection with the breath.
With the breath is just your connection to being here. You have to have air or so-called air, and it says that you are part of this realm. Without air, you don't belong here. And then you will encourage or elicit the responses of those things that get rid of non-air creatures. Everything pretty much is an air creature, even the things in the water.
Yeah, because the breath is, if there's no breath, then there's no consciousness.
And when that occurs, something has to come and consume that.
And so that's what I mean though, as far as like people not really breathing or having shallow breaths
So you're
from
just speeding up the process, the decomposition process. It's a slow,
breathing shallow.
yeah, it's a slow death, but it's still occurring.
How much breathing, how much breath exercises is too much? How much is, I guess, would be too little?
You can do things incorrectly or improperly, and you should know better than to overindulge in anything that's going to be destructive. You can turn something that's productive or constructive to a destructive level, and that's just perversion. Like sex, you can pervert sex. People pervert sex.
Yes, it's never really anything wrong with the things. It's just the way you do the things.
It has a purpose, just like you have eyes. You don't eat with your eyes. Well, you do actually eat with your eyes, but it has its own food source. Uh, you don't go sticking pencils in your eyes. That's not
That's
what
not the
they're.
kind of light.
Yeah,
That's not the
it's
kind of
not
light that goes there.
right. It's not for that. So the same thing with sex. Sex has a purpose, and like you said, about the so-called economy and thinking outside the trade box and weaning yourself off that trade box for another form of interaction. That's the same thing that's going to have to occur and is occurring with so-called sex. When people realize, okay, this is for the introduction of souls. Your genitalia is made to do one thing only when it comes to the procreative process. It's here to help usher in souls.
Yeah, because I mean, it's the whole approach to everything. As far as the Taoism, as far as looking into sex, your approach to sex really tells your whole approach to life.
They're there for a purpose. And
So
that
when it
main
comes,
purpose is for the procreative process. This is way out of the realm for most people. And I'm not the first to say it, obviously, but that saying or that voice that has said it before me is always disquieted, is always kept on the fringe.
don't have sex.
Find another way to exchange your energy with this other person. They said, well, no, we're made that way. The so-called pleasure principle, the pleasure sensors within the organs and in the brain are made for just pleasure. And that's why it's there. It's like, yeah, just like color you find in fruit and the scent that you find in fruit and flowers is to attract a bee. But what's the end game or end goal or actual purpose? Pollination.
That's what keeps things going forward.
Right. So it's like, oh well, we don't want the whole fertilization. We just want the good feeling. That's
Like
it.
Dr. Africa said, like you've entered the course. It's to complete the course. Everything else is just masturbation.
Yes, exactly. So all these folks are masturbating, and then you have people living in the craziest of circumstances by saying, you know, um, like the whole reproductive rights argument. First of all, abortion is not reproduction.
It's
That's
murder.
right. You're killing something. So how's that reproduction? Murder is not life. Killing is not life. If you're killing something, I'm not getting into any judgment issues. I'm saying when you take something and kill it, that's not reproduction. So therefore, when you're doing it, you're actually being the opposite end of it. You're part of the decomposition end. Now you're a decomposer. So now we've added that on to mankind and human and man. You have now the decomposer in the form of women. Women have taken on another cloak or hat. All genders have taken on various hats that don't belong to them.
So the
Women.
males are committing abortion on their end with ejaculation without,
Mm-hmm.
and then the females are on their end. What is it doing? I'm sorry, you broke up.
I said a baby doesn't stand a chance. They got it coming and going.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I just um I just always wanted to know what that does, like what that's doing, that whole process as far as abortion, or if you want to just talk about the next time, maybe. I don't know, it's up to you, but abortion, I know, is something that is kind of a hot topic at the moment, and I know it's a lot more ramifications than people realize. And I feel like if they knew what the real consequences were, they wouldn't do it.
You don't play around with sex. I don't care who you are, whatever your gender. You don't play around with sex. It's sacred.
Like I remember we were saying before, people are they're being possessed by parasites that want them to breed, so that then their body's just going to be completely dedicated towards catering to a parasite, and that'll drain them, and then that'll happen to that parasite, and then it just keeps going.
Yes, that's exactly correct. So the whole purpose of all this, one of the reasons for this, is so that the voices, yours, mine, will incite actual thought, and not just thought, and then action, and then logic, which is part of the thought, is supposed to be part of the thought. And then seeing clearly, don't disrespect your emotions by allowing them to take the helm. Emotions will stay where they're supposed to stay, in the background. When your emotions are in the forefront, you're disrespecting yourself, and you're probably disrespecting anybody else around you. Your emotions are supposed to be reserved for particular times only. One is during the sex act, and the other is during moments of synaptic reprieve, such as grief, and only up until a certain point. Grief has to be logic too. Obviously,
It's just like pleasure. Like you were saying, pleasure, everything has to be allocated respectfully.
Exactly. So with
When
that,
then you're just being sorry for yourself. Yeah.
exactly. So with that in mind, I think we've gone to the end of the buffet plate. And
Yeah.
do you have anything that you want to part with?
No, that's it for me. Everybody, I'll put it in the pinned comment at the top, pharohshouse.com, so that you get the spelling correct on that. And you guys should sign up for pharohshouse.com and reach out to him when you're truly prepared. You should verse yourself with the podisodes on there probably before you go ahead and call him, just so you realize what you're getting into. And yeah, that's really about it for me, Pharoh. You bestowed a lot of knowledge as per usual. So definitely grateful, and yeah, that's all I had to say.
All right, then. Well, with that said, everyone listening, so time to know is now. Thank you for listening.
Pharaoh's House Podisode is the sole property of PHAROHshouse.com. All third-party copyrights revert to their original owners. To inquire about syndication or sponsorship, please visit our website at PHAROHshouse.com.